Hello, it's Amanda Foxon-Hill here from Suddenly Autistic, and today I want to talk about love language. And in particular, I want to start off with hugging and physical contact as a focus, but just talk about love language in general. And I'm going to start with a reflection of a personal story, and then I'm going to just go through some of the more structural bits that I've been reflecting on. So again, it's all from a personal perspective, the whole thing, but I wanted to just split it up so that there's a bit of structure to what I'm talking about, if you know what I mean. Anyway, so love language and this. So the other day I was having a conversation with one of my daughters. Both of my daughters are older now. They're only young adults, but they've left home, pursuing their dreams, doing their thing. And as such, they're coming into contact with other families and other people their age and other groups. And you know, they're able, because they're out of our family home, they're able to sort of compare and contrast their experience with others in a way that isn't it isn't the same when you still live at home. So when you live at home, you take a lot of things for granted, I find. And as soon as you move out and become independent, some of the things that were just normal for you, you know, become something to ponder, compare and contrast, you know, look up to, or maybe decide that that wasn't for you. And it's not to say that you don't realise any of that while you're living there. A lot of the time, you know, most kids will clearly tell you what they don't like and what they're not going to be like when they leave you. But, you know, some of the other things they don't necessarily know. So that's what's going on, really, just for context. In the conversation with my daughter, there was an itchy ear, a mosquito. In the conversation with my daughter, she was commenting on how she'd noticed that one of the other families that she'd met, one of the friends that she's got, they seemed to hug more than we did. They're more huggy. Huggles, and the way that I like to describe it. So anyway, she was saying that this family seemed to be more huggly and snuggly than we were. Now, when she said that, I started to think, hang on a minute, I feel like we did that a lot. But I didn't say anything because, you know, it wasn't really at that point for me to say that. I did say something afterwards, after I'd acknowledged, yeah, that's fair enough, and I started to talk about love language. But at that point, I realised that my daughter, you know, she didn't really want to discuss, you know, psychological terminology and bits and pieces. It wasn't the time for that. She was just making an observation, and it was interesting, and she wanted to share it with me, get an initial, oh, okay, and then acknowledgement, and then move on. But it led me to this, which is a conversation about love languages. So, love language, what is it? Now, I have to acknowledge that when I say that term, every time I say it, I feel like I'm going to vomit. I don't like it, love language. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's some kind of trauma response. I really don't know. But the whole term of it just makes me want to vomit. It gives me a physical reaction. But I'm going to keep saying it. I'm going to push on because I think it's important. Here we go. Anyway, there's this thing called love language. There's a guy called Gary Chapman. I know nothing about him. I've only found him on Wikipedia, to be honest. And he was a marriage counsellor apparently in 1992. Maybe he wrote a book in 1992 called Romantic Partners. So he wrote a book about this love language, putting this idea together. Maybe he was the first person, maybe he wasn't, but he's kind of synonymous with this whole love language lingo. So that's where that comes from. So for me growing up, I wasn't a hugger. I didn't like hugs. And I still don't particularly. I'm definitely not a hugger. You couldn't accuse me of that. When I was a little kid, I had really bad eczema. And I had bad eczema on and off throughout my childhood, even into my 20s and even into my 30s. So there were times when I'd be eczema free, and there'd be times when it was awful. It was really, really bad. And when I was younger, at primary school, I got bandaged up a few times because it was that bad. So it was definitely not just a little bit, it was all over me. And as I got older and started reflecting on this deficit I had, because it seemed to me to be a deficit of not liking hugs, that I put it down to me having eczema. So just fill in there, because I realised I didn't make that clear. I've never liked hugs. As a kid, I never wanted hugs. I occasionally used to get feedback on my lack of hugging, and now I've got black pen on my fingers. This is what happens when I do art. so I knew that there was something wrong with me, or the society thought there was something wrong with me, and not liking hugs was not normal. But I didn't like them, and I didn't do it because that's just the way I was. I was like, nah, don't like it, not doing it. I don't care what you think, stuff you. Which, you know, didn't really go about winning friends and influencing people. It literally just led me to feel like more of an alien. But that was my life, and like I said, I rationalised it because I had this bad eczema and thought, well, you know, it makes sense, doesn't it? I'm just trying to protect myself. Now, me as a parent with my 2 children, I still wouldn't classify myself as a hugger, but my perception when my daughter was telling me this story about other families, my immediate perception was, well, I feel like we showed a lot of physical affection. I think we weren't cold, you know, we were more affectionate. I felt like I shared my feelings towards my children more than my parents did, and I thought, well, that must be a good thing. But then I had my little glimmer of insight fairy come and say, yes, Amanda, but you're judging it on your history, not their reality, which is true. So my history was I didn't like hugs at all. My parents were not cold fish either. I mean, they were pretty, you know, they did things and whatever, but I didn't really need it from them. I wasn't looking for it from them. So what they gave me was more than enough. In fact, it was too much. Sometimes I didn't want it. Whereas my children are not me. They're different. You know, regardless, they're different. I grew up in a time that was different to my kids' time. So my kids now, or our kids when they grew up, you know, the norms were different. So everything's different. So I can't really compare and contrast my experience to theirs because it was all very different. So my perception that I was, you know, that I wouldn't say I thought my daughter was wrong. I respected my daughter's interpretation of events and I accepted it fully. However, I felt that that I was quite affectionate, and that gap is why I'm making this video, because there was a gap there. There's a teachable moment there. There's a gap. There's an opportunity to delve more. So with me as an autistic person, and I've only known that about myself in the recent past, the last year or so, that my hug quota, you know, what I need in terms of physical attachment and contact every day is quite low, much, much lower than the average person. So for me, you know, hugging, maybe even just touching my child once a day is a lot. Whereas for other people, you know, if they don't hug and kiss them every 5 minutes, it's not enough. So my standards were low. So of course I'm going to feel like, yeah, we did a good job. And I don't for any moment think that I was at the very, very low end of the scale. I think that in the majority of cases, anyone looking into our family would see that there was physical affection and love in the house, just perhaps not quite at the same level as in other houses, and definitely not in all the same ways. So that is that, and then it brings me on to this whole love language thing. So this whole concept that this Gary guy has come about, and this was in the context of romantic relationships, not necessarily parenting, but I have seen it referred to and had it referred to me in terms of counselling for families as well. So I think it's, you know, it works the same way regardless. And there's different ways of showing love language. So there's words of affirmation, there's physical touch, there's receiving gifts, there's quality time, and there's acts of service. Now, for me personally, the physical touch is not my primary love language. The way I got taught or was mentioned about love language is that, you know, you have your primary method, the go-to, the one that you use as a dominant, and then you perhaps do all of the things sometimes, but you don't do all of them all the time, you know, unless, I don't know, that would be tiring. But usually we gravitate towards one. So I would say out of all of those things, what I gravitate towards is quality time. And what I mean by quality time is, well, it says here, uninterrupted and focused conversations, one-on-one time is critical. For me, it's about attention. So paying attention carefully, listening and learning the other person's wants and needs and fears and goals, and then helping them to manifest the reality that they want, guiding them in the right direction for them, you know, accepting them for who they are, creating opportunities for them to find out who they are and explore different things. That's the way I parented. So I really, really focused on quality time, as in not just, oh, you know, I'm out at work a million hours, I've got to give them 2 hours of Sunday and that's my quality time. Not at all. It was that every bit of time that I'm with them, if I can, I want that to be where I'm building my deep connection, understanding about them, and then learning about them so that I can help them become who they want to become, and feel supported with who they are at any given time, however that manifests. So that to me was my primary love language, and I'd say that it was a big part of, and it is a big part of me now. If I'm paying attention to you, if I'm sharing time and space with you, it usually means I have an affection for you. I don't tend to spend time or pay attention to people I don't really like. So that's a really big one for me. And then there's acts of service. Now, acts of service will be things like, for example, when one of my daughters decided she really wanted to do dance, and then she wanted to do every type of dance, so she was there all the time. I did dancing as a child myself, and I can understand the need and want for that, so that was fine, but I didn't enjoy any of it personally. I didn't enjoy the scene. I wasn't a dance mum. I really found it very stressful and physically painful to go along and do all of that, but I did it, and I felt that was, rather than me saying no or limiting it to suit me, I engaged in her activity and passion and let her do that. And the same for my other daughter, who both of the girls really like to play football, but and I'd take them, but sometimes I would take them to the game. And I remember one occasion where my older daughter was playing football and I was sitting there reading a book, and one of the other parents, a guy, came up to me and told me off, and I should be paying more attention. I should be paying attention. Quality time is something that yes, definitely. But in that context, when my daughter is actually playing football, or actually they were warming up and waiting for the game to start, me reading a book is a way of self-regulating and staying present. It's an effort to get there. It's not a chore. It's not something I don't enjoy or won't want to do, but it's physically draining and psychologically draining and sensorily draining. So for me, even though I didn't know it at the time, having my book, being able to sit in my chair and create my own little universe to escape into for a minute, made me a better person and made me able to sit through what would otherwise be quite a sensory overload experience. But of course I was judged for that. So anyway, I think you might start to get the picture that love language is complicated. There's these 5 primary ways that we express love with other people, romantic or otherwise, and we tend to dominate in one or two, one way and maybe have a secondary way, and then other things happen when they happen. And as a parent, I was expressing my love for my children through quality time and acts of service over and above what would be, your basic good parenting. I would really go overboard with helping my kids to explore their passions, even when it was physically painful and exhausting and excruciating for me to do so. I tried to keep that to myself as best as I could. Okay. So I think that's important to acknowledge. I find it important to acknowledge, but I also find it important, and what I'm reflecting on now that I have hindsight, because my children have gone past that stage and beyond and over and above the gate of childhood, that the way I'm showing love and the way I'm measuring how good I am at it, or how it's penetrating through or meeting the needs of my children, were very much based on my experience as an individual, my history, reflecting on how it was for me, and am I doing better or worse or the same, or is it even comparable? So that was my benchmark, I suppose. And looking at friends and family and finding differences there in real time wasn't something that I'm naturally inclined to do. I'm not a natural comparer. So how my friends were bringing up their children, it wasn't really something that I felt that was relevant to me. It was up to them how they did that. But like I said, the conversations with my children, now that they're young adults and reflecting on the world, have taught me that I parented in a way that I felt was displaying lots of love language, but that might not have been how it was felt for how it was received by my children. They might have received acts of service as just what parents do. They might have received quality time as, but you weren't here all the time. This is not a judgment on children or my children or anyone's children or families. this is just a reality that I guess what I'm learning about myself is that, you know, and others really, is that our reality isn't everybody else's reality. My perception isn't everyone else's perception. And I know that. I've always known that and been aware of that. But when it's something like this, that's very instinctual and it's just, you know, coming from a feelings place, I found it hard to kind of make that connection until it's become more obvious. So that's why I wanted to share it. So I think in terms of parenting, and especially in terms of autistic parenting, but not necessarily, I think this would affect all parents, that one thing that I've definitely reflected on is how important it is as a parent, as soon as we feel we're in a safe space with some space and time and some supportive people around us, I think it's really important for us to get to know and think about and reflect on the way that we show love now and the way we did in the past, and what we learnt about showing love and the methods, you know, all of that process. So just reflecting on ourselves, you know, what's our love language? Getting to know ourselves is really important. And I think with that, it's also important to note that for some people, the way that there's an instinctive way to show love might not be healthy or always the best way for the individual, because what I'm learning especially is that the best way to, I suppose we've got our own ways. So I've got the way that I show love, and it's not to be huggy, it's to do these other things. But if I have a child that requires physical contact because that's the way that they understand love, then I need to find a way of understanding that about them and meeting them at least halfway or explaining myself. So these are the sort of things that I've been reflecting on. So like I said, my first tip to myself was that, and that's what I've been doing. So thinking about the way I show love now and how I've done it in the past, learning about myself, what's normal, what's healthy and what's not. So why, you know, the narrative I had about why I didn't like hugs saved me from the shame of not hugging people or wanting to for a while, but then that wore off. I learned more about myself and about the world, and I realized that actually it wasn't just my eczema or even my eczema at all that stopped me hugging. I've recently learned it's more about me as an autistic person with my sensory sensibilities. The second thing that I've been doing, I think is really important, is to discuss and share with others. I'm sharing this with you now. It may or may not be helpful or whatever, but I think sharing with people who are safe, sometimes that has to be a counsellor or someone who's, you know, more professional, and especially in the first instance, because self-analysis is only as good as your insight to yourself. And like I said, I've been autistic for 47 years and it's a fundamental part of my existence, but I've only known it for 1 year. So everything I've analysed about myself for the 46 years before wasn't wrong. It served me well, but it's been limited because I haven't known this about myself. So that can start with counselling maybe, and it did for me, but it's then got to go on to other people. And I think the way I discuss that now with my children is to really take the time to discuss different love language styles and compare and contrast, and just create space to have those conversations with my adult children, because there has to be an acknowledgement that maybe my lack of physical affection compared to their norm was perceived as a lack of love, and that wasn't my intention. And so reinforcing and discussing and sharing social stories of these other things might be a helpful step in terms of their self-development and in terms of their self-awareness, and in terms of me reconciling and consolidating the job I did as a parent. The third, and I've got 6, so the third I've thought about is deepening your understanding about love language and learn how you can identify opportunities to connect with others and bridge any perception and gaps. So for me, this is a constant education thing. So as I said, really reflecting and looking back over what the love language types are, recognizing when others are behaving in that way. For example, I have a family member whose love language is to donate food to us, so giving us food. Now, unfortunately, that's probably the least way, even worse than hugging, to be honest, for me, or on a par with hugging. I'm kind of like now feeling a bit sick thinking about either of them. But I have very particular sensory issues around food and what I can digest and how that helps me. And when someone brings me food, is food in general, it can go either way. If it's something that I've asked for, that's fine. If it's something that I haven't, it can feel very invalidating. If it's something that I've explained to the person that I'm allergic to, sensitive to, can't eat, don't like, and they keep bringing it, that feels pretty terrible. It just reinforces, and especially when it comes into the home, because the home's supposed to be a safe place. So there's a lot of issues like that where somebody's primary love language doesn't suit. And for someone with autism, for me with autism, that the reaction to that that mismatch can be quite, intense, because of the chronic invalidation that we've had experienced for forever. So I think that deepening the understanding helps for me to feel compassion and to find compassion and understanding when that sort of thing happens within my family circle. It also helps me to understand when others are acting out of their love language, even when it doesn't suit me, and to accommodate that and use it as a point to discuss. And that brings me on to 4, which is look for teachable moments and learnable moments. So these are unplanned opportunities to offer insights or explore a tangent. So sometimes I'll be the teacher and I'll notice something that, maybe my children or my husband have responded to the way I've behaved with, a bit of sadness or disappointment. And I can, once I'm aware of these love language and, how maybe there's been a mismatch from my end, I can then point that out, make it more visible, we can discuss it together and maybe come up with a better option, or at least take away the sting of rejection that maybe others are feeling. And that works the other way too. If somebody's coming to me with love language and I seemingly reject it and they're feeling bad, well, conversations really help to bridge that gap and be understanding. The number 5 is listen and invite the dialogue, which is what I'm trying to do here. Have it as a topic of discussion around families, however old. I think, children from a very young age will compare their experience to others. And let's hope in many cases theirs is as good as, if not, maybe they feel it's a little bit better. Because, it's nice when you feel like your family is the best for a little while at least. But, if they are feeling that their situation is deficient compared to their peers, it's so much better if they can express that to somebody and have that investigated sooner rather than later, because often I feel it's not actually a neglect or even something much worse than that. It's usually just this love language, we're speaking different languages from different places, all good. And the last one is embracing difference, but being prepared to have to explain it all. So I think that's where this is tiring. So making these videos, I mean, this one's taking me a long time to do. Well, that's relative. I've had to record it a few times because I felt like I was waffling, and I might still be, I'm not sure. But it's tiring to think of this thing. It's deep psychological stuff, and but it's really, really important. And I think that it's important to embrace this as part of being human, as someone with autism, as someone in a family, as someone who's living with people who, let's face it, most families, you'll have people with different love languages who prefer different ways of interaction. It's part of that. Being prepared to have to explain it sometimes, I think, is hard. As somebody who's autistic now, I feel like I've been chronically misunderstood and often judged. So the whole, from my earliest memories of me not liking hugging, it's come with an attached shame to it that I haven't picked up. I don't tend to pick up the shame as much as some other people I've seen have done, but it definitely was a bad thing. So the fact that I didn't like hugging was seen as a deficit on my character by others, and I did reject that and thought that they were stupid, which is probably good for me, but thinking other people are stupid for thinking that is also not good. So I have to work on that, that mindset. But I think that's the problem. When your love language sits outside the norm, it can be really difficult because, like I said, that child is growing up comparing you and your parenting to the norm. They don't necessarily have the scope, the personal insight, the emotional intelligence, or the opportunities to realise that there's a diversity in this space. So I think it's up to us who are diverse, and we all are, in the way we express love, to go through these processes and first think about ourselves, then discuss it with others in a careful, non-judgmental, safe space, and then go on to deepen our understanding. You know, stay open, look for moments to share and teach and learn, and invite the dialogue. So that's the way, that's I suppose, I think, important in terms of making the world a better place. So that's it really. Big topic, love language. Gary Chapman, no idea whether he's a good bloke or not, but he did write this about romantic relationships. Let's hope he saved a few marriages if that's what the people wanted. But I think it's been useful for me as a parent and me as an individual and a member of a family. So thanks. I'll see you again whenever. Thank you.